Caleb Mercer was 10 years old the first time he saw a stranger look at 4 hungry children and make a choice that would change every one of their lives. Years later, when his hair had turned white and his own grandchildren gathered near his chair, Caleb could still remember that afternoon in the dry hills outside Red Willow, Wyoming. He remembered the heat rising from the road. He remembered his little brother crying from thirst. Most of all, he remembered the lone scout sitting on a gray horse above the ridge, watching them struggle beside a broken wagon. Their father had been dead for 4 days. Daniel Mercer had died trying to save the wagon when the horses panicked on a narrow mountain trail. One wheel slipped over the edge, and Daniel grabbed the lead horse's reins. He had stopped the wagon from falling. But the wagon had rolled over him. Caleb's mother, Clara, buried her husband beneath a cottonwood tree with a small iron shovel. There had been no preacher, no town bell, no neighbors. Only Clara and her 4 children. Caleb was 10, Emily was 8, little Noah was 5, and Grace had just turned 4. The next morning, Clara put the children back in the wagon and continued west. She had no other choice. Her brother lived near Red Willow. At least, Clara hoped he still did. She had not heard from him in nearly 2 years, but his old letters were the only hope she had left. Then the wagon broke. The rear axle cracked with a sound like a rifle shot. The wagon dropped hard to one side. Clara stared at the broken wood for a long time. Caleb watched his mother's face and knew something terrible had happened, even before she spoke. "We walk from here," she said. They carried what they could. A blanket, a tin cup, a small cooking pot, and a cloth bag with the last handful of cornmeal. By the second day, the cornmeal was gone. Clara told the children she had eaten while they slept. Caleb knew she was lying. He had seen her give her portion to Grace. By the 3rd afternoon, Noah could barely walk. Clara carried him against her side while holding Grace's hand. Emily followed close behind, and Caleb dragged the blanket bundle across the dusty ground. His shoulders burned. His feet hurt. But he refused to complain. His father had once told him that a family needed someone to stand when everyone else was tired. Caleb's thought that meant him now. He did not know that 10 years old was far too young to carry such a thought. "Ma," Emily whispered. Clara stopped. "What is it?" Emily pointed toward the ridge. "There's someone up there." Caleb looked. A rider sat against the bright afternoon sky. For one terrible moment, nobody moved. Clara pulled Grace closer. "Caleb," she said quietly, "get behind me." "I'm not a baby." "Behind me." Something in her voice made him obey. The rider began moving down the hill. Slowly. He did not race toward them. He did not reach for the rifle resting in the leather case beside his saddle. He guided his gray horse down the rocky slope, as if he wanted them to see every movement he made. When he reached the road, he stopped nearly 30 feet away. The man was tall and broad through the shoulders. Dust covered his brown coat. A faded blue scarf hung around his neck, and a short beard darkened his weathered face. He looked like a man who had spent more nights under open sky than beneath a roof. He removed his hat. "Ma'am." Clara said nothing. The stranger's eyes moved toward the children. He saw Noah leaning against his mother's skirt. He saw Grace's dry lips. He saw Emily's torn shoes. Then he looked at Caleb. Caleb lifted his chin. The stranger did not smile, but something gentle entered his eyes. "Broken wagon back on the trail?" he asked. Clara's face tightened. "How do you know?" "Passed it this morning." The man's voice was calm. "Saw the grave near the cottonwood, too." Clara went still. Caleb saw her fingers close around Grace's hand. The stranger lowered his eyes for a moment. "I'm sorry." "We don't need pity," Clara said. "No, ma'am. We're going to Red Willow." The man looked west. "That's more than 30 miles. We'll make it." "Not tonight." "We'll make it." The scout studied Clara for a few seconds. Then he looked at the children again. Caleb expected him to argue. Instead, the man walked his horse toward a flat rock beside the road. He opened one saddlebag. The smell reached Caleb before he saw the food. Bread. Real bread. Noah made a small sound. Clara looked down at him. The scout took out a wrapped piece of smoked meat, a small sack of dried apples, and a canteen. He placed everything on the rock. Then he stepped back. "Name's Mason Cole," he said. "I scout trails for cattle outfits and wagon companies." Clara stared at the food. "We can't pay you." "Didn't ask." "We don't take charity." Mason nodded slowly. "Then don't." Clara looked at him. He pointed toward the food. "I'm tired of carrying it." Caleb almost smiled. His mother did not. "Mr. Cole." "Ma'am, you expect me to believe a trail scout doesn't want food?" "No." Mason put his hat back on. "I expect you to believe I can find more." Clara's eyes filled with something Caleb had not seen since his father died. Anger. Not at Mason. At herself. At the road. At the broken wagon. At the empty food bag. She looked away. Grace whispered, "Mama, I'm hungry." Those 3 words ended the argument. Clara closed her eyes. When she opened them, her shoulders seemed lower. "Children," she said, "sit down." Mason turned away while they ate. Caleb noticed that. The man pretended to check his horse's saddle while Noah pushed bread into his mouth with both hands. Emily ate dried apples so quickly Clara had to tell her to slow down. Grace held a piece of bread against her chest, as if someone might steal it. Clara ate nothing. Mason noticed that too. He walked back to the rock and picked up the last piece of smoked meat. "Boy." Caleb looked up. "Me." Mason handed him the meat. "Your ma forgot to eat." Clara's face hardened. "I did not forget." Mason looked at Caleb. "Looks like she forgot." Caleb understood. He carried the meat to his mother. Clara stared at him. "Eat it, Ma. You need it." "I ate bread." "Caleb, Pa would tell you to eat." The words came out before he could stop them. Clara's face changed. She turned away quickly. Then she took the meat. Mason walked back to his horse. For the first time since the burial, Caleb saw his mother eat a full piece of food. When the children had finished, Clara stood. "Thank you," she said quietly. "We'll be moving now." Mason looked at the sky. Dark clouds were forming over the northern hills. "Storm coming. We've walked through rain before." "That isn't rain." Clara followed his eyes. The clouds were almost black. Mason continued. "I've got an old survey cabin 3 miles south. Roof holds. There's a well beside it. We're going west." "Not tonight." Clara's jaw tightened. Mason sighed. "Ma'am, I don't know what kind of men you've met on this road." Clara looked at him sharply. "But I know you're afraid of me." "I'm careful." "Good." His answer surprised her. "You should be." Mason pointed toward the dark clouds. "But you should be more afraid of that storm." Thunder rolled across the hills. Grace covered her ears. Noah began to cry. Clara looked at her children. Then at the road. Then at Mason. 3 miles. 3. We stay one night. Fine. We leave in the morning. Fine. And my children stay with me. Mason's expression did not change. Wouldn't have it any other way. He turned toward his horse. Clara lifted Grace into her arms. Caleb helped Noah stand. Mason looked back at them. 4 tired children. 1 exhausted mother. 30 miles of dangerous country behind them and more ahead. He was silent for a moment. Then he removed his rifle case from the saddle and tied it across his back. He lifted Noah onto the horse. Clara stepped forward. "I didn't say he could ride with you." "He isn't." Mason placed Grace behind Noah. Then Emily. The gray horse stood calmly. Caleb stared. "There isn't room for me." Mason looked at him. "Didn't say there was." Caleb's heart sank. Mason took the horse's reins and handed them to Clara. Then he knelt in front of Caleb. "Climb on." Caleb blinked. "What?" "My back, boy. I can walk." "I know." Mason waited. Caleb looked at his mother. Clara gave a small nod. Slowly, Caleb climbed onto the scout's back. Mason stood. Caleb wrapped his arms around the man's shoulders. "You don't have to carry me," Caleb whispered. Mason started walking beside the gray horse as thunder rolled again. "I know." The first cold drops of rain struck the road. Clara walked beside him, holding the horse's reins. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Clara looked at Mason. "You can't carry all of us." Mason kept his eyes on the trail. "No, ma'am." "Then why are you doing this?" The scout stopped. He looked at Noah, Grace, and Emily sitting on his horse. Then he glanced back at Caleb clinging to his shoulders. Finally, he looked at Clara. His voice was quiet, but Caleb remembered every word for the rest of his life. "Because from this road to that cabin, not one of you rides alone." The storm broke over the hills, and none of them knew yet that Mason Cole had just made a promise far bigger than 3 miles. The storm reached them before they reached the cabin. Rain fell so hard that Caleb could barely see the trail over Mason's shoulder. Wind pushed through the hills, bending the grass flat against the earth. Thunder shook the ground beneath Mason's boots. Still, the scout kept walking. Caleb felt every careful step. Mason never hurried. He seemed to know exactly where each stone and hole waited beneath the muddy road. Behind them, Clara led the gray horse while Emily held Noah and Grace steady in the saddle. "How much farther?" Clara shouted. "Half a mile." "You said that 10 minutes ago." Mason looked back. "I was trying to make you feel better." For the first time in 4 days, Clara almost laughed. Almost. The survey cabin appeared through the rain like a dark shadow against the trees. It was small. 1 room, a stone chimney, and a narrow wooden porch. To Caleb, it looked like a palace. Mason reached the door and lowered Caleb carefully. Inside, Clara helped the younger children from the horse. Mason pushed open the door. The cabin smelled of cold ashes and dry wood. There were 2 narrow beds, a table, 4 chairs, and an iron stove. Mason immediately began working. He built a fire. He found blankets in an old wooden chest. He filled a pot from the cupboard well beside the cabin. Within an hour, the children were dry and sitting near the stove. Mason cooked beans with strips of dried beef. Clara watched him from the table. "You keep a lot of food here." Scouts learn to leave supplies behind. For themselves. For whoever needs them. Clara looked at him. "How many people have you brought here?" Mason stirred the beans. "You're the first." The answer made the room quiet. Caleb noticed his mother lower her eyes. Mason served the children first, just as he had beside the road. Then Clara. Then himself. Noah fell asleep while holding his spoon. Mason gently removed it from the boy's hand. "I'll take the floor," he said. Clara looked toward the 2 beds. "The children can share one, I'll take the other." "Good. And you?" "Floor. You carried my son, fed my family, and walked 3 miles through a storm with Caleb on your back." Mason spread a blanket near the stove. "Floor is warmer." Clara knew he was lying, but she did not argue. That night, Caleb woke to voices. He remained still beneath the blanket. His mother sat beside the stove. Mason was near the door, repairing a leather strap. "You saw the grave," Clara said. Mason's hand stopped. "Yes. My husband was Daniel Mercer." Mason waited. He wasn't careless. Never thought he was. The horses panicked. "I saw the tracks." Clara stared into the fire. "He saved us." Mason nodded. "I believe you." Caleb heard his mother take a slow breath. "Everyone keeps looking at me like I'm waiting to fall apart." "Are you?" Clara looked at him. Mason continued working on the strap. Caleb expected his mother to become angry. Instead, she whispered, "I don't have time." Mason looked toward the sleeping children. "No. If I stop, they stop. Maybe. If I'm afraid, they become afraid. Probably." Clara's voice grew harder. "So I keep moving." Mason tied the leather strap. "Even when the road is killing you." Clara said nothing. Mason placed the strap beside him. "There's a difference between moving forward and refusing to rest, Mrs. Mercer." "You don't know me." "No. You don't know what I've lost." Mason looked at the fire. For the first time, something dark crossed his face. "No," he said quietly, "I suppose I don't." Caleb closed his eyes before either adult noticed he was awake. But he remembered the sadness in Mason's voice. The storm continued through the night. By morning, the road had disappeared beneath mud and water. Mason stood on the porch studying the hills. Clara joined him. "When can we leave?" "2 days." Her face tightened. "Maybe 3. We can't stay here 3 days." Mason looked at her. "Why?" Clara opened her mouth. No answer came. Mason walked toward the well. The children spent that day exploring around the cabin. Noah followed Mason everywhere. At first, Mason pretended not to notice. When he chopped wood, Noah stood 10 feet away. When Mason checked the horse, Noah watched from the fence. When Mason repaired the porch step, Noah sat beside him. Finally, Mason handed the boy a small piece of wood. "Hold this." Noah smiled. Caleb had not seen his little brother smile since their father died. Mason showed him how to hold a nail. Then he showed Emily how to brush the gray horse. Grace discovered a small box of smooth stones beneath one of the beds and arranged them across the table. Caleb stayed near his mother. He still did not trust Happiness. Happiness had been in their wagon before his father died. Then one wheel slipped. Caleb had learned how quickly good things could disappear. That afternoon, Mason found him sitting behind the cabin. "You avoiding work?" Caleb looked up. "No." "Good, I've got work." Mason handed him a coil of rope. "Come on." They walked toward a small fenced area behind the cabin. A young brown horse stood inside. Caleb stopped. "I didn't see him yesterday." Storm scared him into the trees. Mason leaned against the fence. "He's been wandering these hills for months." "Is he yours?" "No." "Whose is he?" "His own, far as I can tell." Caleb smiled slightly. Mason noticed. "Think you can help me?" "With what?" "Getting him used to people." Caleb stared at the horse. "I don't know horses." "Neither does he." Mason climbed over the fence. Caleb followed. "Don't chase him," Mason said. "Then how do we catch him?" "We don't." Mason sat on the ground. Caleb looked confused. "We wait." "For how long?" "As long as it takes." Caleb sat beside him. The brown horse watched them from across the enclosure. An hour passed. Caleb became restless. Mason remained still. Finally, the horse took one step closer. Then another. Caleb held his breath. "Don't reach," Mason whispered. The horse came close enough to smell Caleb's hair. Caleb's heart beat hard. The horse stepped away. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." He left. He came closer than yesterday. Caleb looked at Mason. "That's enough. For today." Caleb thought about those words. That evening, Clara announced they would leave the next morning. "The road is still bad," Mason said. "We can walk. Grace has a cough. She always coughs after rain." Mason looked at the little girl sleeping beside the stove. Clara crossed her arms. "We have already stayed too long." Mason nodded. "All right." His easy answer surprised her. Caleb saw disappointment on Mason's face before the scout turned away. The next morning, Clara packed the blanket. Mason filled a sack with food. Clara tried to refuse. Mason placed it beside Caleb. "It's for the boy." Caleb understood the trick. His mother did too. She said nothing. They walked less than 2 miles. Grace collapsed. One moment she was holding Emily's hand. The next she was on the ground. Clara screamed her name. Mason was beside Grace before Caleb understood what had happened. He touched the girl's forehead. His face changed. "She's burning." Clara dropped to her knees. "Grace." The little girl's eyes barely opened. "Mama." Mason lifted her. "We go back." Clara did not argue. They returned to the cabin quickly. Mason placed Grace in the nearest bed. He cooled her forehead with wet cloth. Clara sat beside her daughter. "What is it?" "Could be fever from the cold." "Could be." Mason looked at her. "I'm not a doctor." Fear entered Clara's eyes. "Where is the nearest one?" "Red Willow." "How far?" 28 miles by the North Trail. Clara looked at Grace. "I'll go." "No." Her head snapped toward Mason. "She's my daughter. And you'll take 2 days on foot." "I'll take your horse." Mason stood. "My horse knows the trail with me. He doesn't know you." "I don't care." "I do." Clara stepped toward him. "Mr. Cole, if you think I am going to sit here while my child burns with fever." "I'm riding." The room became silent. Mason picked up his coat. Clara stared at him. "You don't have to." "I know." "Then why?" Mason looked toward Grace. Then at the other 3 children watching him. "Because she needs a doctor." He walked outside. Clara followed him onto the porch. Caleb moved close enough to hear. "Mason." It was the first time his mother had used the scout's first name. Mason stopped. Clara stood beneath the porch roof. "If something happens to you out there." "It won't." "You don't know that." "No." The scout looked toward the dark hills. Then back at Clara. "But I know what happens if nobody goes." He mounted the gray horse. "Keep the fire high." Clara nodded. "Give her water whenever she wakes." Another nod. Mason pulled his hat low. "I'll be back." He rode north. Caleb stood beside his mother and watched the scout disappear between the hills. Hours passed. Grace's fever climbed. Clara stayed beside her. Noah cried quietly. Emily prayed. Caleb sat near the window. Night came. Mason did not return. The next morning arrived. Still nothing. By afternoon, Clara stopped looking toward the door. Caleb did not. He remembered the road. He remembered the grave beneath the cottonwood. He remembered how quickly a man could disappear from a family's life. Then, just before sunset, he heard horses. Caleb ran outside. Two riders came down the trail. Mason was first. A thin, older man with a black medical bag rode behind him. Mason's face was pale. Blood covered one sleeve of his coat. Clara rushed onto the porch. "What happened?" "Horse slipped in the North Pass." "You're hurt." "Doctor first." The older man hurried inside. Clara grabbed Mason's arm. He winced. "Mason, I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "Grace." Clara stared at him. Then she released his arm and followed the doctor. Grace's fever broke before midnight. The doctor said another day without medicine might have ended differently. After the children were asleep, Clara found Mason sitting alone on the porch. His shirt sleeve was rolled up. A deep cut crossed his upper arm. "You need stitches." "Doctor already did it." Clara sat beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then Clara said, "You could have died." Mason looked across the dark hills. "So could she." "She isn't your child." The words came out harder than Clara intended. Mason slowly turned toward her. "No." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Then why do you keep doing this?" Mason looked through the cabin window. Caleb was asleep near Noah. Emily held Grace's hand. The fire glowed behind them. Mason's voice became quiet. "Because I know what an empty house sounds like." Clara said nothing. Mason looked down at his bandaged arm. "I had a wife once." Clara's breath caught. "And a daughter." The scout swallowed. "Her name was Lily." Clara waited. Winter fever took them both 6 years ago. The silence between them changed. Mason looked toward the children again. "I rode trails because trails don't ask questions. I slept under trees because empty cabins were easier than empty homes." Clara wiped one tear from her cheek. "Mason." He stood. "You should rest." He reached for the door. Clara caught his hand. Mason stopped. She did not say thank you. She knew now that he did not want thanks. Instead, Clara whispered, "Stay by the fire tonight." Mason looked at her hand holding his. Then at her face. Slowly he nodded. The next morning, Caleb woke early. Mason was asleep in a chair near the stove. Grace was breathing easily. Clara sat at the table, repairing Mason's torn coat. Caleb watched his mother for a moment. She looked different. Not happy. Not yet. But something had changed. 3 days later, a rider wearing a clean black coat appeared on the southern trail. He stopped outside the cabin. His eyes moved over the children playing near the porch. Then toward Clara. "Mrs. Mercer." Clara stood. "Yes." The man removed a folded paper from his coat. "My name is Walter Briggs. I represent the county office in Red Willow." Mason stepped from behind the cabin. Walter looked at him. Then back at Clara. "We received word about a widow traveling with 4 children and no permanent home." Clara's face went pale. Walter opened the paper. "Under county law, children without proper shelter or support may be placed in temporary care." Emily grabbed Clara's dress. Noah stopped moving. Caleb felt cold. Clara stepped in front of her children. "You will not take them." Walter sighed. "Mrs. Mercer, this isn't a request." Mason moved toward the porch. Walter looked at him. "And who are you?" Mason stopped beside Clara. His voice was calm. "Mason Cole." "Are you family?" Mason looked at the 4 frightened children. Then at Clara. For the first time since he had found them on the road, the scout did not answer quickly. because this time, one wrong answer could tear the family apart. Mason looked at Walter Briggs and understood exactly what the county man wanted to hear. Family. One simple word. But Mason had spent most of his life refusing to lie, even when the truth cost him something. He glanced at Clara. She stood straight beside him, but he could see fear in her eyes. Emily held the back of her dress. Noah pressed close to Caleb. Grace stood barefoot on the porch, still weak from the fever. Walter folded the paper. I asked if your family, Mr. Cole. No, Mason said. Clara lowered her eyes. Walter nodded. Then you have no legal place in this matter. Mason's jaw tightened. Walter stepped toward the porch. Clara moved in front of him. You aren't taking my children. Mrs. Mercer, nobody wants to hurt them. Then leave them with me. You have no home. I have this cabin. Walter looked at Mason. Does she own it? No. Does she rent it? No. Does she have employment? Clara said nothing. Walter's voice softened. I understand you've suffered a terrible loss, but understanding doesn't change the law. Caleb stepped forward. My ma takes care of us. Walter looked at him. I'm sure she tries. She doesn't try, she does. Caleb, Clara whispered. But Caleb could not stop. His father was gone. Their wagon was broken. Their food had disappeared. Now another man had come to take the only thing they had left. Each other. You can't split us up, Caleb said. Walter's expression changed slightly. Nobody said anything about splitting you up. Where are we going? Red Willow Children's Home. With Ma. Walter did not answer. Caleb understood. So did the other children. Emily began crying. Noah wrapped both arms around Clara. Grace looked at Mason. The little girl walked across the porch and held his hand. Walter noticed. So, he said, you've become attached. Mason looked down at Grace. Her small fingers were wrapped around two of his. Yes. Attachment doesn't make a family. Mason raised his eyes. No. Walter placed the paper back inside his coat. I'll return tomorrow morning with a wagon. Clara stepped forward. You can't. I can. Please. The words seemed to hurt her. Caleb had never heard his mother beg anyone. Walter looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Mercer. Give me time. For what? Clara had no answer. Walter mounted his horse. Tomorrow morning. He rode away. Nobody moved until the sound of his horse disappeared. Then Emily began sobbing. Clara dropped to her knees and pulled all four children close. No, she whispered. No, nobody is taking you. Caleb wanted to believe her. But he had seen the paper. He had seen Walter's face. Mason stood several feet away. Grace reached for him. Mason. He looked at her. Are they taking us? Mason's throat tightened. No. Clara looked up. Mason. No, he repeated. Clara stood. You heard him. I heard him. He has the law. Mason walked toward his horse. Caleb followed. Where are you going? Red Willow. Clara stared at him. Why? To ask questions. Mason, he'll be back in the morning. Then I better ride fast. He placed his boot in the stirrup. Clara caught the saddle. What are you planning? Mason looked at her. Don't know yet. That doesn't make me feel better. It shouldn't. For a moment, Clara almost smiled. Then her fear returned. Mason. He waited. If there's nothing you can do, there is always something a man can do. And if it isn't enough, Mason looked at the children. Then I'll find something else. He rode toward Red Willow. The journey took hours. Mason entered town after dark. Most businesses were closing, but the sheriff's office still had a lamp burning. Sheriff Henry Dalton knew Mason from his scouting work. He listened without speaking. When Mason finished, Henry leaned back. Briggs is right. Mason stared at him. Didn't ask if he was right. Then why are you here? Need to know how to stop him. Henry sighed. The widow needs permanent shelter and proof of support. She has shelter. Your survey cabin isn't permanent. Then my ranch. Henry stopped. Mason had not spoken those words in years. My ranch. The Cole property sat 12 miles north of Red Willow. A 2-story farmhouse. A barn. Nearly 300 acres. Mason had abandoned it after his wife and daughter died. Henry slowly leaned forward. You'd take them there? Yes. Briggs may still argue you're not related. Mason stared at the desk. What makes me related? Henry understood the question. Mason, what makes me family under the law? The sheriff was quiet. Then he said marriage. Mason looked away. Henry continued. Don't make a promise because you're angry. I'm not angry. You look angry. I always look like this. Henry almost laughed. Mason did not. She lost her husband less than 2 weeks ago, Henry said. I know. She may say no. I know. And you can't marry a woman just to fight Briggs. Mason stood. Who said that's the only reason? Henry stared at him. Mason left the office. He rode back through the night. At sunrise, Caleb saw the gray horse. Mason. All 4 children ran from the cabin. Mason dismounted. Grace reached him first. He lifted her carefully. You're still here. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Told you I was coming back. Clara stepped onto the porch. Her eyes were tired. Did you find something? Mason placed Grace down. Maybe. Clara waited. Mason looked at the children. Caleb, take them behind the cabin. Caleb frowned. Why? Need to talk to your mother. Caleb knew exactly what that meant. He took Noah and Emily. Grace refused to move until Mason promised he was not leaving again. When the children were gone, Clara crossed her arms. What happened? Mason removed his hat. I own a ranch. Clara blinked. What? North of Red Willow. You told us you were a scout. I am. You never said you owned land. Nobody asked. Clara stared at him. Why do you live in survey cabins if you have a ranch? Mason looked toward the hills. You know why. Clara remembered the story of his wife and daughter. Her anger disappeared. The ranch has 5 bedrooms, Mason said. Barn, well, good roof. Clara's eyes widened. The children can live there. With you. If they want. And me. Mason looked at her. Especially you. The silence between them became heavy. Clara stepped back. Mason. I know. My husband died days ago. I know. I loved him. I know. I'm not ready to replace him. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? Mason took a slow breath. For the first time, Clara saw the scout nervous. The man who had walked through a storm. The man who had ridden an injured horse through the North Pass. The man who had faced a county officer without moving an inch. That man could barely look at her. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you. Clara said nothing. Mason continued. Henry says Briggs can still make trouble because I'm not family. Clara understood. Her face changed. You want to marry me? I want Briggs gone. Clara's eyes hardened. Mason immediately shook his head. That came out wrong. Very wrong. I've spent too many years talking to horses. Despite everything, Clara laughed. It was a small laugh. But Mason stared at her as if he had heard music. Clara noticed. Her smile disappeared slowly. Mason lowered his voice. I won't lie to you. Then don't. I care about those children. I know. I care about you. Clara looked away. I don't expect you to love me. Mason, I don't expect you to forget Daniel. She looked back at him. I wouldn't ask that. What do you want? Mason's eyes moved toward the cabin. I want noise in my house again. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I want muddy boots by the door. I want Noah following me when I'm trying to work. I want Emily feeding my horse too many apples. I want Grace putting rocks on every table I own. Clara laughed through her tears. And Caleb. Mason smiled slightly. I want Caleb to stop thinking he has to be 40 years old. Clara covered her mouth. Mason stepped closer. I want you to rest without believing the world will end if you close your eyes. A tear moved down Clara's cheek. I don't know how. I know. What if I can't love you? Then don't promise it. What kind of marriage is that? An honest one. Clara stared at him. Mason held out his hand. Come to the ranch, keep your room. Keep Daniel's name in your heart, raise your children. I'll ask nothing you don't want to give. Clara looked at his hand. And if one day I want to leave, I'll fix your wagon myself. She closed her eyes. Then she placed her hand in his. Walter Briggs arrived 2 hours later. A county wagon followed him. He stopped when he saw Mason standing beside Clara. I warned you. Mason nodded. You did. Walter looked at Clara. Children need to gather their things. No, Clara said. Walter sighed. Mrs. Mercer. We're going to the Cole Ranch. Walter looked at Mason. That changes shelter, it doesn't change family. Mason handed him a folded paper. Walter opened it. His eyebrows rose. A marriage license. Temporary county approval, Mason said. Sheriff Dalton signed as witness. Reverend Samuel Brooks is expecting us this afternoon. Walter looked between Mason and Clara. This is sudden. Clara stepped beside Mason. So was losing my husband. Walter became quiet. So was breaking our wagon. So was running out of food. So was my daughter nearly dying. Clara took Mason's hand. Life has been sudden lately. Walter folded the paper. He looked at the children. They were clean, fed, safe. Grace was holding Mason's leg. Caleb stood close beside him. Walter placed the paper back in Mason's hand. I'll update the county record. He returned to his horse. Before leaving, he looked at Mason. 5 bedrooms. Mason nodded. Walter almost smiled. Sounds adequate. The county wagon left empty. That afternoon, 6 people rode to Red Willow. Mason sat at the front of an old wagon borrowed from Sheriff Dalton. Clara sat beside him. The children filled the back. At the small church, Clara stood before Reverend Brooks. She did not promise to forget Daniel. Mason did not ask her to. She promised honesty. Mason promised patience. When the preacher declared them married, Grace raised her hand. Does this mean Mason is family now? Everyone laughed. Mason knelt beside her. If you'll have me. Grace hugged him. The Cole Ranch opened again that evening. Dust covered the furniture. The rooms were cold. Mason stood in the doorway as 4 children rushed inside. Noah ran upstairs. Emily found the kitchen. Grace began placing stones on the windowsill. Caleb remained beside Mason. "You really want us here?" Mason looked at him. "Boy, I rode 6 years trying to get away from this house." "Why?" "Too quiet." A crash came from upstairs. Noah shouted that he was fine. Mason smiled. "Think that's fixed." Months passed. Clara slowly learned to laugh again. Mason never asked her to remove Daniel's small photograph from her room. One winter evening, she moved the photograph to the family shelf downstairs, beside the picture of Mason's wife and Lily. Mason saw it. He said nothing. Clara took his hand. That was enough. Caleb stopped trying to become a man overnight. Mason taught him horses, fences, tracks, and patience. Years later, Caleb would understand the greatest thing Mason taught him had nothing to do with scouting. A strong man did not always ride ahead alone. Sometimes, strength meant slowing down when he saw someone struggling. Sometimes it meant sharing food, carrying a tired boy, riding through the night for a doctor, opening a house that grief had closed. Caleb Mercer lived 83 years. He had children, then grandchildren. Every time they asked how the Mercer family survived the terrible road outside Red Willow, Caleb told them about the broken wagon, the empty food bag, the storm, and the quiet scout on the gray horse. He always ended the story with the same words Mason Cole had spoken when Caleb was only 10 years old. Words that became a promise. Then a home. Then a family. Not one of you rides alone. And from the day Mason Cole found them on that lonely road, none of them ever did.